In this video, I'm going to show you how to get started using the Tauri framework. If you haven't installed Tauri yet, just head over to the Tauri website and they've got a pretty good guide on how to get everything configured and working. But assuming that you've installed Tauri and all the required dependencies, let's go ahead and create a brand new project using the Tauri command. Now there's two different ways to do this. The simplest is to just use the Tauri command. There is another command that's available as well, and if you look through their guide, I believe it's called the Create Tauri app, but I'm going to use a different app to do this. It is still a part of the Tauri framework, so once you've installed everything, you should have this command available to you as well. So let's go over to a new folder where we can install or initialize a new Tauri project. So I'll do cargo Tauri init. And so what we're presented here with is a simple scaffolding of the application. We have to just run through a few questions and give it some default values. So it's asking, the first question it's asking is, what's the name of your app? We'll keep it as the default Tauri app. And it's also asking for the title of the application as well. And again, we'll keep that the same. And then here it's asking for an assets folder. So what we want to do here is specify where our assets is going to be located and relative to our current project directory. So what I'll do is I'll just put a // and the name of the folder UI. So we'll create that folder once we've done with this initialization part. So go ahead, and now it's asking for a development server. So I'm not going to use a development server for this. I'm going to keep it, I'm going to leave it blank. And it's also asking for a dev command. So because we're not using a front-end development environment for this, I'm just going to remove that and keep it blank too. And do the same for the build command. And so that's it. That's created a Tauri project for us. Let's go have a look at that. So this is the folder that is created for us. I'll open this up in Visual Studio so you can see what the contents of this folder looks like. So you can see some files and folders have been generated. But for now, we'll only focus on the Tauri config file and the Rust code. So let's open up the Rust code and see what's inside. So don't be alarmed by this. We're going to remove some code from here. But before we do anything else, let's compile the code and be hit with our first error. There's nothing like a good error to wake you up. So let me close this terminal and open it up again by moving into this directory. So the command that we want to run is cargo Tauri dev. So this is going to compile all of Tauri's dependencies. It may take some time. You might want to do something else in that time. But if it takes too long, I'm just going to put an edit in the video. Okay, great. So after it finally compiled, we're hit with our first error, and that's because I haven't created the UI folder. I wanted to show you this error just in case you forgot to do it yourself and then you came across this message yourself. It would have been pretty self-explanatory, so I'm sure you'd be able to figure it out. But let's go ahead and create that folder now. So what we want to do is we want to create that folder in the root of our application. So go ahead and create UI, and within UI I'm going to put index.html. Okay, so now let's just say hello world and compile it again. So we still have a blank screen, and the reason for that is because I didn't actually specify or put the HTML tags in there. And again, that's just something I wanted to show you so that in case you came across that and weren't sure what was going on, it's because you need to put HTML tags in there. Okay, and run it one more time. And there you have it, hello world. So now that we have the app working, let's start writing some front-end and back-end code. So we'll start with the front-end and work our way to the back-end. So in this, I'll remove hello world And in this front end, what we want to do is we want to create a button that we can call, that we can use to call a Rust function. So I'll say button and give it an on click, and give it the function get user. Okay, so the idea here is we want to click this button and have Rust return a user for us. So we'll say get user. Now we can write the get user function, but before we do that, we need to enable a property in the Tauri config file. So let's go over to the config file, and just under the app section, what we want to do is we want to enable a property called with global Tauri. And what that will do is it will expose the Tauri API within the window object. Without this property set to true, we won't have access to the Tauri API. So let's add that in there and save it. And now we can close it. We don't need this file anymore. And now we can start writing some JavaScript code. So go ahead, type in script, and we want to gain access to the API. So the function that we want to use is the invoke function. So just paste that in there. Okay, so as I said, the with global Tauri property set to true will expose the Tauri, this API, as part of the window object. And from this API, the function that we want is the invoke function. The invoke function is used to call a Rust function. And you'll see just in a moment when we code the get user what that looks like. But before we do that, we should probably set up the Rust backend function. So let's go ahead and go back to the Rust side and delete all of this code within setup. We don't need that. Okay, so the function that we want to set up is called fn get user, and this is the function that the JavaScript function is going to call. So let me just change this indentation. Okay, and what we want to do is we just want to print something to the terminal. So just say get user. What we also have to do is we have to annotate this function as a Tauri command. And that's the way that Tauri will know that this is the function to expose to your front end. So that will be a command. And finally, what we need to do is we need to put this function into Tauri's handler. So if I go over here and type in invoke handler, and then we say Tauri as generate handler, which is a macro, and we just put our Rust function in there. So now our Rust code is set up. We've got a function called get user, which is going to print get user to the terminal, and that function is also placed into the invoke handler. So let's see how we can invoke this function from the back end, from the front end. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create this function. So it has to be an async function because the invoke function returns a promise. So async function get user await invoke, and now the name of the Rust function, which is get user. Okay, it looks about right, so I'm going to go ahead and compile it. Right, so we have the get user button. So if we click on it, we should see something. We should see get user printed to the terminal, and there you have it. So that's how to call a Rust function from the front end. But we also want to be able to provide some arguments to the Rust function as well. And we can do that by providing a list of Rust arguments as an object. So let's say, for example, I want to say get user and I want to provide an ID of say 101. So this is the ID that I want to have Rust return. But the user, we haven't set up a user with the user ID 101, but I'm just giving you an example here. The argument is always provided as a JavaScript object, and the property is the argument for the Rust function. So if we go back to the Rust function, we can put an argument here and say ID as a U32. And if we had more than one argument, we'd again just put a few, well, let's say we want to say by email as well. So that might be, you know, something like saeed@mail.com. And then to gain access to that in the Rust function, we would just say email as a string. Right? Now, what we want to do is we want to take it a little bit further. It's no good printing something to the console. What we want to do is we want to return some actual data. So what we can say is, rather than printing, we can return a string, and we can just say return Saeed. I'll remove these parameters here for now, because we're going to extend this example a little bit further. So since it's returning a value now, we want to capture that value in the front end. So it's a let user and then console.log that out. Okay, and let's run this again. Right, so now if I bring up the DevTools and we go to console and we click on get user, you should see the user side come through. Let's expand on this, and instead of returning a string literal, let's return an object. So what I'll do is I'll create a struct and say struct user, who has a username. Let's give it an ID as well of U32, a username that is of type string, and also a password. Okay, so now I'm going to create a new user here. So let's say let user. Actually, we don't need to do let user. Let's just go ahead and just type user. This can get quite annoying sometimes. I have to stop this. Okay, that's stopped. ID, give it a default value of 0. And username, we'll say not a default value of 0, ID 1. Username Saeed. And password, you're going to like this. Password 123. Okay, and we will return a user. Well, you can see now that Rust is not liking this. And if we hover over where it's not liking it, it's essentially saying that this object can't be returned because it's not serialized. So we need to serialize it before we can send it. So to do that, we can just use 30 to serialize the user struct. So let's go ahead and annotate this with 30 serialize. Okay, and now you see that the error message has gone away. So let's rebuild it again. Okay, and now let's have a look at the DevTools. and there you have that object showing up now. But we're not just limited to objects. We can also have we can also return arrays of objects as well. So let's return a vector of user. Okay, and we'll put that into user1. Copy this just to create another user. User2 with another user ID. Let's give it another name. Let's say John. Password. Let's just leave that the same. Okay, and now we can just return a vector of these users. User1 and user2. Compile it one more time. Okay, let's have a look at console log, and here you have it, an array of users. Now what we want to do is we want to look at managing state, because what you'll find is when you develop an application, at some point you will want to manage some state. So we're going to expand on this example by adding some sort of state in here. So we'll create a new function in the front end, and we'll say we'll have a new button that says login. So we'll say do login. And the login will take well, ordinarily you will take the login details from a form, but we're just going to hard code the login details. So we'll say login, we'll call a function, we'll create a function called login in Rust, and we'll provide it some arguments. So we'll say username, and password. And that will return a Boolean value. So we'll just say result. This is not important. We're just going to return a true for now. Okay. Let's go ahead and create that Rust function now. Again, we need to set it up as a Tauri command. Fn login. And login takes a username as a string and also a password. Right. And it will return a Boolean. So for now we're just going to have it return true. Okay, and let's add the login to the handler as well. Okay, so now that we've done that, what we want to do is we want to construct a user object from this login details. Now normally what you would do your authentication here and then have some sort of login state, but we'll just reuse the same struct that we've created. So we'll create this struct again. So let user from this using this user struct, username and password, and also ID. We'll default that to 1 for now. Okay, so the idea is we need to take this user and we need to put it into some global state, and then at some point we want to be able to retrieve that global state. So let's have a look at how to create some global state in Tauri. So in Tauri is pretty simple. What we have to do is we need to use the manage method to manage global state. So if you go ahead in your run function and type in manage, we can provide the state that we want to manage here in the manage method. And normally what you would do is you would put your state into a mutex so that it can be locked and mutated correctly between the different functions. So we'll create a mutex and we'll add a default user state. So new user, give it some default values. We should probably start with ID first. ID, so we'll say 0. Username, a empty string, and lastly the user password, and again an empty string. Okay, let's format this. Let me format this so you can see it better. Don't worry if it doesn't make sense at the moment. I'll walk you through again so that it's much clearer. Okay, so I'm using the manage method, and I'm initializing a new user and wrapping that user in a mutex so that we can modify that user from within the login function. So now that we set up the state, we can access it from any of the Rust functions by providing it with a state argument. So let's go to the login and give it a state argument, Tauri state, which holds a mutex, which holds a user. Okay, and what we want to do is we want to get the user login details that was submitted from the front end and store that into the state. So rather than assign this to the user variable, I'll take this and assign it to the state. So first we need to dereference the state. Well, first we need to unlock it, unwrap it, and then we dereference it, and then we assign to it. Okay, so this will now save the user details or the login details that's going to come in from the front end and put it into the state. So what we want to do now is access that state. So when we click on the get user, rather than retrieving a hard-coded user object from here, we're just going to return the data that's stored in the state. So let's change this back to a user. And once again, we need to gain access to the state. Tauri state. Okay, and we need to do the same thing as before. So, say state. Something's not quite right here. Right, starting the mutex. Okay, now we can unlock it and then unwrap it. And this is going to give us a mutex guard. Oh, sorry, without the dereference, it would have given us a mutex guard. But to get to the value, we need to dereference it. And then once we've dereferenced it, we're going to have a problem because we cannot move the user out of the mutex. So what we'll have to do is we'll have to get a reference to it. And now on this reference, we can say user.clone and return the clone from the user. So let's take a look at this error. So okay, it's saying because we have a reference, we need to clone it. So user does not implement clone. So let's go and implement clone for the user struct. Okay, and now that error's gone away. So just to be clear, what we've done here is we've accessed the state. Because the state is in a mutex, we've unlocked it, and we've just unwrapped it just to handle the result, which would have given us a mutex guard. And then once we have a mutex guard, we dereference it, and we need to get a reference to it, because just by simply dereferencing it, we would have moved the value out of the mutex, and we can't do that. So we get a reference to it, and then we'll have to clone that user so that we can return it. So now if we go back to our front end, and let me just change this to login, and okay, so that's fine. And let's run it one more time. Okay, so if I click on the login would submit the hard-coded login details, and then it would be put into the state, and then we should be able to click the get user to retrieve that information back from the state. So let's click that. Oops, we got an error. Can't find variable do login. Where's that? Yeah. Okay. Try it again. Head over to console. Let's click on login. Okay, so this should have returned a Boolean true. Okay, and now if we click on get user, we should have the details come over from the state. Okay, so in the next video, we'll take a look at Tauri's event system and see how we can get data from the backend to the front end. And we'll also try and put together a small text editor app that will utilize a lot of the stuff that I've talked today, and also the event system as well. Okay, so if you like this video, guys, please consider giving it a thumbs up, and I'll see you all on the next video.